Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Travel. My name is Gary Arndt, and I'm coming to you once again live from my mom's basement here in beautiful Hortonville, Wisconsin. With me again, as usual, is the man so nice they named him twice, Mr. Chris Christensen. How are you doing, Chris?
I am good, but I am somewhat concerned that you coming from your mother's basement is removing some of the glamour that is travel blogging.
I keep it real. I got to tell people what it is. And I just want to say I have finally reached a point in my own podcast, The Global Travel Conspiracy, where I have now been on my own podcast more times than your podcast.
That is a major
milestone. So I think it was, so the 9th episide. So I got that going for me now. It was kind of sad.
Almost as many times as you have been on this podcast, on This Week in Travel.
Yes, lately, the last couple months.
Gary, who have you been your 9 guests?
That beautiful voice, by the way, is Jen Leo, coming to us, I believe, from Carlsbad, California. How are you doing, Jen?
Good. Happy end of summer, everyone.
My guests have been Robert Reed, Lee Avamonte, Jody Attenberg, Shannon O'Donnell, Francis Tapon has been that'll be my guest next week. I've already recorded it. Stephanie Arney, who was a guest on the show. I just had her. And then I did 2 shows that were just monologue shows about recent travels that I've done. So I think that's everything.
I think Francis Tapon is actually my guest next week also.
Oh, and Chris Christensen, of course. So got a lot of really nice ones lined up, though, for the next few months. Really kind of happy with that. Elizabeth Becker, who wrote the book Overbooked, I'll be interviewing her at the Adventure Travel World Summit in Chile. Bunch of other great stuff lined up. And our guest this week, he has been off the beaten path. He has been to quaint villages nestled in charming valleys filled with friendly locals. He knows all the hidden gems and the best-kept secrets. And when he writes, he avoids cliches like the plague. He has written, edited, and reviewed the book on travel writing. Please welcome back to the show, Mr. Don George.
Hello, it's wonderful to be back.
I worked on that intro for a while.
That was awesome. That will be published instantaneously, I'm sure. That was amazing.
I'm sure there are some cliches that I missed. We're going to be talking to you a lot more. You have a brand new book out. But before we get into the show, we do have some bad news. I just found out, and I'm sure the rest of you did this morning, Keith Bellows, who was the editor at National Geographic Traveler, just passed away. I only met him briefly, but Don, I know you are a very good friend of Keith, and you've worked with him in the past. What can you tell us about Keith?
He was an amazing guy. He was an enormous talent. He had tremendous vision and energy and imagination, and he took over Traveler in 1997, I believe it was, 1998, and he was there for 17 years. I knew him all those years. He and I would have wonderful, long conversations about storytelling and the power of travel to transform, and he believed so fervently in the importance of travel, in the importance of stories, and how they could work together to change the world. And he leaves a huge legacy. He was a great man, a great inspiration to many people. Traveler, carries on as his legacy, I think, and the great work that he did will live on in lots of people. But he will be very dearly missed. He was a good friend, a great man, and I want to pay tribute to him. He was a fantastic human being.
Yeah, I woke up this morning and found out, and as I follow a lot of friends with a lot of travel writers on Facebook, this morning was basically all just eulogies to Keith when I woke up. And
yeah, the huge influence on a lot of good people.
And Traveler has always been probably my favorite travel magazine because they focused on the kind of travel that I like to do. It wasn't all just luxuries and infinity pools, and that's something I always really enjoyed about it.
Exactly. He really looked for the heart of a story and the heart of a culture, and he tried to keep it real, and that's something we can all aspire to.
So let's get on to a couple news stories, things that happened this week. We've had a bunch of these. We will always have these, I think, on our show. Another incident occurred in the skies, terror over Colorado, as a woman who had a cat in her purse, the cat was put into the restroom. She became very upset and then started saying things like she was going to bring the plane down to get her cat back. Now, these things happen. People love their pets. I get it. But then the people on the plane were going to bring the plane in for emergency landing, which I also kind of get. And they also had 2 fighter jets escort the plane to land. Do you guys think that's a bit obsessive or just a bit much? It was kind of overreacting? Anybody?
It's hard to say no to that. I obviously wasn't on the plane. Didn't hear what happened. Didn't know if there were good reasons to take her seriously. Clearly, those are words you should not use on a plane. I mean, let's assume that goes without saying, at
Agreed.
least to everybody except for one woman. But unless it's an attack cat, I'm thinking that might have been a little bit of an overreaction.
They worded it as a comfort cat.
A comfort cat.
But here's the part. Now, maybe I missed this part of the story, or I just don't understand. The cat. They put the cat in the bathroom. Why would they have taken the cat away from her and put the cat in the bathroom?
Because I don't believe it was in an approved container. Like they're supposed to be in a little cage or something.
I see.
It was literally just in her purse.
Okay.
One of these days,
Fighter jets is a bit extreme.
One of these days, there's going to be a woman who's very into making quilts, and she will say, "I'm bringing down on the plane," referring, of course, to goose feathers. And someone will misinterpret that, and we'll have a story about that, I think. UPI had a really interesting story.
Speaking of keeping it real.
So I assume this was at probably the Old Faithful Lodge where this happened. I guess I think there's another lodge in the park. I don't know which one, but so it has one of these guest forms that you fill out, and it's like, what can you do to make your experience better? And so someone wrote down, "Our visit was wonderful, but we never saw any bears. Please train your bears to be where guests can see them. This was an expensive trip not to get to see bears."
I think that a lot of tourists would be happier if they would just train the bears in Yellowstone.
The thing is, if she
almost managed to say that with a straight face.
If instead she had taken her trip to Jellystone,
exactly.
the bears there are smarter than the average bears, and she probably would have seen one. Of course, you don't want to bring a picnic basket to Jellystone either.
I thought people went to Yellowstone to see Old Faithful.
There's quite a lot of
Which
interesting.
is well trained, actually. Yeah. Old Faithful is well trained. So.
Old Faithful is very well trained. Not the most spectacular geyser, but it is reliable. So.
There's so. I mean, has everyone here been to Yellowstone?
Yeah.
As a kid,
you
my
haven't
grandparents took me there.
Nope, never been there. Well, because the bears. Once they get the bears trained and going, but until then, it's just too risky. Who knows if you're gonna.
Actually, I think Don hasn't been to Yellowstone because he hasn't edited a book on national parks yet. It could be the only book he hasn't edited yet.
Right. I'm waiting for that. Exactly. No, there's so much more than Old Faithful. I mean, that's what makes it such a great park. Is that there's lots of other geysers for starters. Plus, you have the elk and the bison and the hot springs and the different pools, and it's one of the best wildlife parks in North America, hands down.
Occasionally bears.
And sometimes bears. I got to see some bears this last week while you guys were recording. I was up in Labrador in Torngat Mountains National Park, and we saw a polar bear and a whole bunch of black bears. So had that going for me.
Don, Tim Cahill lives right around the corner from Yellowstone,
exactly.
right?
Which is a great inducement to get up there, actually. Yeah. One of these days.
So now it's not that you haven't been to Yellowstone. You haven't been to go visit your buddy Tim.
Exactly.
Either.
That's right. Right. I'm still putting that trip together. But yeah, it's his backyard. It's basically right out. Yeah.
And I think that's what he called the book that he wrote on it. Right.
Yep. Exactly. One of these days, it's on my list.
Another story from Travel Mall. This is for the more interesting, more adventurous type of people. A tour company in New Jersey wants to become the first company to set up a surfing trip to North Korea. It's going to be $2,400. That'll include visa fees, flights from Shanghai, everything else. I'm sure that this targets a certain market, people that like surfing, but...
Does it include a return ticket?
That is explicitly not ever addressed. That's a very good point. It says flights from Shanghai, but it never says back to Shanghai.
Yeah.
Got to be kind of careful. And this is kind of one of the bigger news items. Delta, and I actually think a couple other airlines, U.S. airlines, have done this.
I think they did it in response to Delta's announcement.
Yeah, they have banned the transportation of big game hunting trophies. In particular, you can't transport lion, leopard, elephant, rhino, and buffalo parts from Africa on any of its flights worldwide. I think Lufthansa still does it, though. Believe it or not.
No, it says Delta joins Lufthansa. It says Delta joins British Airways, Lufthansa, Emirates, Qantas. I can't pronounce all of these. It's a long string.
Qatar, Etihad, Iberia, Singapore, and Brussels Airlines were the other ones.
Thank you, Chris.
Maybe it's South Africa Airlines that still does it.
Well, that would make more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not universal, but it's certainly going to make it that much harder to get things back into the U.S. I don't think did we ever talk about this on a previous show? I don't know.
No, the story about that went viral on the internet was the dentist.
Cecil.
Yeah. I don't think we did.
Well, it has returned to the news this week. All over, everybody knows I listen to AM talk radio. It's been all over the radio this week that conflicting, I'll say the word approval. Conflicting approval as people are having all sorts of Cecil and the dentist Halloween costumes. And from what I heard, it's a costume of the dentist with the lion's head eating the dentist.
Wow.
Yeah, so that made plenty of morning news radio shows this week.
Are people selling that as a costume, or are people just making their own?
I did not hear that bit, but it sounded like they were referring to a costume, so I'm guessing it's out there. Out there as in to be able to buy. But I have not Googled it.
Wow.
This final story, I don't even, we talked a lot of weird travel things on this show. This might be the weirdest. I don't get it. I don't even get it physically, how it can happen. But at a Howard Johnson's hotel in Niagara Falls, there was an infant, less than a year old, who was put inside a room safe. And evidently, the parents had to contact the staff to get the baby out. Now, it turns out nothing, I guess, bad happened. Baby's in fine shape. But how in the hell does this happen?
Older sibling.
Do you think so?
Sibling.
Mama, you
As a
said the
younger
baby
child,
was
I
precious,
actually
so I
understand that completely.
Let's hope that's what happened. That would be like the best case scenario, I think.
Yeah, best case. Best and most. No, I don't think it's. Now, this is ridiculous. First of all, this is absolutely impossible. Saunders said it was possible that the baby crawled into the safe and was inadvertently locked inside. No.
All of the hotel safes I've seen, I don't think could even fit a baby.
Right.
Yeah, I can't picture this, and I can't picture that why, what is it, the Howard Johnsons would need a hotel safe big enough for baby size.
On a related
shoebox size.
Yeah, that's what I'm used to.
On a related story, Howard Johnson still exists. I had no idea. You know there's only one Howard Johnson's restaurant left in the U.S.?
Is that right?
Yep. There's only one that's still open. They still got the
Where
hotels,
is it?
but
Where is it?
I want to say it's in Georgia.
Huh. Yeah, we had one here, but it is now IHOP or something else.
Yeah.
So they didn't get in trouble for this? This is just a... This is just a news item. There's nothing that says that they...
Well, they said they kind of took off. So
Yeah, that was the part that was a little suspicious, is when they call the police because they had to call the child support, child abuse unit to investigate it, and the parents took off apparently before they got a chance to talk to the local law enforcement. That was a strange part of the story. Just a weird story.
You know what though? If it had accidentally happened to my family, I would have been more available to assure them it was an absolute accident versus running. Right? If it was a true accident, wouldn't you be communicating with the hotel and law enforcement?
you'd think. But then again, until we are tested in such a way, who knows how we will react. Don't know. And the other thing is, it's right on the border, too. If they were Canadian, they could have just gone over the border, in which case they'll probably never find them. They did apologize, so they could be Canadian. You never know.
That's good evidence.
And on that note, Don, you have a book out. Now, you've been involved with a lot of books in your time.
I have.
How many, Don? How many books?
12 books. 12 books total.
Wait, we're talking about writing books at this point, right?
Right.
These aren't just the books that you've read.
Right.
Gary was not clear. He said you've been involved with books.
Total.
Okay.
So I've written one book, which is Lonely Planet's Guide to Travel Writing, and then I've edited 11 anthologies of travel tales. So then the new book is the first collection. Sorry?
That sounds small to me. I thought you were coming out with 1 a year, 2 a year for many years.
There was a long string when I came out. That Lonely Planet, I came out with 1 a year pretty much. So I've done like 10 books for Lonely Planet.
Right.
But this is your first book of your narrative travel writing, right?
Correct.
That surprises me. I'm kind of shocked by that.
It surprises a lot of people.
So what is the story behind why the book now, and what brought it on?
Well, for some years now, I've been thinking I would like to compile, the best of Don George, but I just never somehow got around to it. I always had projects going on. I had a book to do for Lonely Planet every year, and one thing and another, and deadlines and deadlines and deadlines, and I just never got around to what seemed like an overwhelming task. But then, Candace Rose Reardon, who illustrated the cover, is part of the story of the book, because I met her at Book Passage in 2012 at the Travel Writers Conference, and we were talking about like my unfinished projects, and I said one thing I really wanted to do was put together a collection of my own stories, and she basically said, well, let's make that happen. So she really was the fuel that kind of got me going on this project and kept me on point and helped me figure out what stories to put in. And now, 3 years later, it's come out as a book by Traveler's Tales, and it's 35 stories, and I'm incredibly proud and exhilarated and excited to finally have this book out in the world.
Yay! Great for you, Don.
Thank you.
And it launched at Book Passage Travel Writers and Photographers Conference this year, right?
Exactly. The Book Passage Travel Writers and Photographers Conference is an amazing place, and it's really exciting that people who are students there some years become faculty later on. Candace was on the faculty this year at the conference that just ended. We've had a number of other faculty members who were originally students, and it's just a place where magic happens and great things happen and projects come together, and this book is one more example of the magic that Book Passage creates.
We recommend it to our listeners every year, Don, every year.
Thank you. Wow, thank you very much for doing that. This was the 24th year, so next year will be a really big one.
Wow.
Number 25.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I should add, all of us have been in attendance.
Right.
Well,
Yes.
we should all go next.
You're all
So 25.
you should all come. You should all come next year. We'll have a big party.
Better
All right,
yet, everybody should whip out a book. Don, you should have a massive challenge where everybody who has been an alum of the conference needs to whip out a book.
Yeah, between now and then.
For the 25th anniversary.
Excellent.
Now,
wouldn't Elaine be thrilled?
The challenge has been set, yes.
I note that Don is telling us that it just took him 3 years to write a book and he didn't write new words. So I'm not sure that...
Well, I did
writing out a book by next year seems like, that seems like that might be a little difficult.
Piece of cake. I did write an original introduction, and I wrote introductions to each of the individual stories. That the introductions kind of say what was going on in my life when I wrote the story and what was going on in the world. So they sort of set a context for each story. So in a way, there's a bit of an autobiographical thread that runs through the book in those little introductions. So it's really fun in that sense too, I think.
Don,
I'm curious. Go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, tell us how many years it spans. How many years does the book span?
So the very first story in the book was published in 1977 in Mademoiselle magazine, and it's the story of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, which I did the summer. So I graduated from college, got a one-year fellowship to live in Greece and teach in Greece. The summer after that fellowship ended, I went to Africa with a friend, and we very impetuously climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And so the first story in the book is that story. The last story in the book was published in 2015, this year, in a BBC travel website. So it spans 38 years of publishing.
Wow.
Now, Don, I have never said I was going to whip out a book or something similar, especially a travel book, I should say, actually. But at least I have a friend who has announced a couple times that he was going to write a book and hasn't produced a book. No one who we're going to name.
The friend sitting to your right and my left?
But if I say, hypothetically, had a friend who was supposed to be writing a book, what is the hardest part about actually getting a book published besides... Well, what is the hardest part?
It's all hard, but
it's all hard.
The writing it is hard. I mean, really, you have to approach it like... My metaphor is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. If you look at the summit, you'll never get there. It's just too daunting, so you sort of do day by day, step by step, chapter by chapter. That's really the only way to write a book, I think, is to focus on one chapter, next chapter, next chapter, next chapter. And then, of course, deciding how to publish it yourself, look for a publisher. That's the big second part of the whole process. But certainly just getting a book done, writing a book, is an enormous undertaking, and it needs a lot of persistence, basically.
Don, the book's broken up into 3 distinct parts: pilgrimages, encounters, and illuminations. Tell us about how these different sections of the book are set apart from each other.
So we began with, I've written hundreds and hundreds of stories for newspapers, magazines, websites over the years. So we kind of looked at all of those and we narrowed it down to maybe 50 stories based on the level of engagement, my personal engagement in the story. So for me, great travel writing is all about 2 simultaneous journeys, the journey into the world and the journey into yourself. And I tried to choose stories that showed both of those journeys really well and fully. So we ended up choosing 35 stories for that, actually 33 stories, and then we had to figure out how to organize them. And we thought about theme or where they'd appeared or geographical region. We considered all kinds of possibilities. But what seemed to emerge really organically was these 3 sort of themed buckets, pilgrimages, encounters, and illuminations. And incredibly coincidentally, those were the 3 words that we had put on the top, the banner of my website, which actually Candace had created for me the year before. We launched my website in the 2004 Book Passage Conference, and at the top it says Pilgrimages, Encounters, Illuminations. And when we were putting the book together, it just suddenly seemed that these were the right 3 buckets to put the stories in. So within each one of those buckets, there's 11 stories, and they're arranged chronologically within each bucket. And then there's a story at the beginning that we call the prologue, which is kind of my overall philosophy of travel, and a story at the end that we call the epilogue, which is called Travel Writing and the Meaning of Life. And then between those is the 3. And so it worked out really beautifully and organically and just kind of perfectly that those seem to be the themes that the stories fell into. I couldn't be happier with the way it worked out.
Wonderful. And it sounds like those themes are exactly what Traveler's Tales is all about. So what a wonderful fit for you to be published with them. Did you get to work with James and Larry, or did you, since you do it all anyway, did you just do it all yourself? Or was there collaboration?
There was huge collaboration. And as you know, I love Larry, I love James. I mean, I've known them all of their professional lives. We've all been in the Bay Area since forever. And it was just a thrill, really, really a thrill to do the book with them. And especially work closely with Larry. He was a part of the process in terms of deciding on illustrations and cover and the way the book would look, the layout of the book. He edited the introductions that I wrote, so he was very much an integral part of the process, and the 3 of us, Candace, Larry, and I, all working together sort of determined the look and feel of the book, and it's been a thrilling, and that's been one of the great riches of the book for me, is not only is this kind of a culmination of my professional life to date, but the putting together of it with 2 really dear friends was like a gift, a great, great layering gift right there. So it's all been spectacularly fulfilling for me.
Good. Well, we want each and every one of our listeners to go out and get the book. So give us some teasers on pilgrimages that were special to you, and maybe a pilgrimage that not every traveler would have on their bucket list. Maybe something set apart from some of the usual pilgrimages.
Well, let's see. So some of the pilgrimages, there's Kilimanjaro, of course, which started it all off for me. I talk about climbing Half Dome in Yosemite, which was a really grueling trip for me. I wasn't sure I was even going to make it, but I did it with my family, and my children inspired me because they basically ran up the face of the mountain, and I was like, well, I guess if they can do it, Dad's got to do it too. There's Uluru in Australia, which is such a sacred, amazing, fabulous place. I write about my wife's home island of Shikoku on Japan, which really is a place of pilgrimage. There's a sacred route of 88 temples that was set up centuries and centuries ago. So pilgrims actually do go there, but for me it's a place of pilgrimage just because the people are so incredibly kind and generous and open-hearted. I learn a lot there, whether I'm going to one of the temples on the route or not. I just learn a lot from the spirit of the people there. So there's pilgrimages all around the world that have informed my life, and it doesn't have to be an ostensibly sacred place. I mean, I think a pilgrimage is wherever you make it. Stinson Beach is a pilgrimage site for me in California because I go there and I get back in touch with the most important things in the world. So there's a lot of pilgrimages that really, I think pilgrimages are in our heart and soul. We make a place a pilgrimage site, and that's what that section of the book is all about.
And since Gary's going to the Galapagos tomorrow, I see you have a section in the pilgrimages, Castaway in the Galapagos. Do you have anything that you want to share with Gary before he sets sail?
Oh man, it's the most amazing, eye-opening, mind-opening place. It's just incredible to see how animals interact when they're not afraid of human beings, how they just look up at you quizzically, like, what are you doing here in my neighborhood? And it's a really wonderful sense of how the planet could be if we treated other species with a little more respect and kindness. It's incredible. It's mind-blowing. So Gary, I know you're going to have an amazing time there, and I can't wait to see what you produce from being there. But it's one of the most rewarding trips I've ever taken. It changed my family's life. My kids went with us, and my daughter says that she became a marine biologist because of the experiences that she had in the Galapagos, swimming with sea lions, and I call it an interspecies play date. She basically became a sea lion for about a half hour one afternoon, and it
Wow.
was really life-changing for her. So yeah, very special place.
How old was she when you took her?
I think she was about 14.
Hmm.
So a very impressionable, very good age.
Don, we talked quite a bit about your travel writing. I'm getting an echo too. Maybe it's just me. But you're also an editor at BBC Travel, and you've been obviously doing a lot with Book Passage over the last couple decades. Where do you see the state of travel writing right now? You know, the changes with digital publishing are obviously in full swing now. It's impacted a lot of things, but you know, you've done a lot of work online, both with BBC and with other things. So where do you see it at right now?
I think it's in huge flux. I think that the landscape is still, I think in my travel writing book I say it's as if we're in the middle of an earthquake and we don't know what the landscape's going to look like when the earthquake is over because it's still going on. There's a lot of opportunity for all kinds of writing. The downside is that there isn't a lot of money paying for all kinds of writing right now, but I think that online there's everything from really short charticle, listicle kinds of stories to really long form, great narrative stories. There's outlets for all of it, which is exciting. I just think the maturation of the medium financially needs to catch up so that people can actually make a living doing some of these great writings. But so actually it's interesting in my book because my book begins in an era when magazines and newspapers were the only outlets. And then as you go on, by the end of the book, most of the stories actually appeared online. And you can kind of trace some differences in the way the stories are written and the tone and the immediacy, but I think for the most part, the qualities that you find in the early stories are still present in the later stories, which to me suggests that I am embarrassed to call my own writing great travel writing, but fairly okay travel writing in one medium can translate into fairly okay travel writing in another medium. And I think it's just you work with the same kinds of principles about dialogue and character and narrative arc, and you can make those work for print and you can make them work for online publications. It's really just great storytelling, what it really comes down to. And I just try to tell great stories and also to try to pay attention to what the world is teaching me, what I've learned, and how I can convey that to a reader who hasn't been through the same experience I have.
When people come to Book Passage, what is and let's say they want a career as a travel writer or they're interested in it, what has changed since 25 years ago versus, say, this year in terms of the advice you give? Not in terms of the writing, because the language hasn't changed. You know, I still think a good story is the same, whether, you know, what medium you put it on is irrelevant. But the business has changed. So what is the advice that you give people if they want to become a travel writer?
You know, in a word, I mean, the first word that just came to my mind was diversify. I think right now, to be a travel writer, you really have to diversify. You have to write for lots of different outlets, but not just writing. You have to take photographs, you have to do videos, you really have to develop an online platform in lots of different ways. You have to become an authorpreneur, so you're getting yourself out there. 25 years ago, there were a handful, literally, of magazines and newspapers with great travel magazines or great newspaper travel sections, and we could very explicitly teach people how to write for those magazines and how to get published in those travel sections. And in that sense, it was much easier. There were 20 people who controlled the travel writing field. Now there's 2,000 people in the travel writing field. And so there's goods and bads to that, but I think the important thing we try to teach now is the more variety of skills you have and the more imaginative you have in the way you get your content out into the world, the better off you're going to be. So don't try to do just one thing, but try to do a lot of different things, but always try to write to your heart and try to create the things that make you feel good about yourself and your work, but diversify as much as you can.
And I've heard a lot of people, and they have a valid point, they complain about the state of a lot of travel writing on blogs, and quite frankly, a lot of them, most of them, stink. But who would you say? Give me the names of like 3 young or new travel writers who, I guess they don't have to be young necessarily, but people who have started relatively recently who you think are doing great work.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Jody. I'm not sure that you would say that Jody started recently, but Jody's been around for a while. But I think her blog is really great. She was at Book Passage last year and did a wonderful job. Guy named Mike Sowden, who I think you all know, is a terrific storyteller, does really great work, I think. Candace Rose Reardon, she does great stories, but she's also a very talented artist, so she puts the stories and the artwork together. I mean, those are 3 people that just immediately spring to mind. Pam Mandel, Nerd's Eye View, she does wonderful writing. I think there's a lot of very talented people creating good stories, thinking about the way they can bring these stories into the world, and merging that dream of theirs with a sort of realistic sense of who the audience is, perhaps where the money is, what do you have to do to finance yourself without losing sight of your dream or without losing your integrity. And I think those are all super important considerations. And those are just 4 people who immediately came to mind, but there's clearly lots of people doing great work out there.
As we talk about some of the things that are harder about doing things on the internet, are there stories that you've told now or the way that you've told them that you are so grateful that things changed because now you can tell that story in a way that you couldn't before?
I think that I tell stories pretty much the same way. But Chris, when you asked me that, I flashed on, I don't know if you remember this, we were on stage at T-Bex in Cancun, I guess it was. And you asked me what I was working on right now at that time, and I told you about this story I was writing about Cambodia, where I was trying to sort of replicate what I'd found in Cambodia was that part of what was so amazing about the archaeologists there was that they were literally piecing together the puzzles of old sites. The sites that had crumbled down, they would find a rock and they would call, this is rock 5A, and then there's rock 5B and rock 5C, and they were literally putting the rocks back together as if they were constructing a picture puzzle. And I told you on stage that I was working on a story at that moment where I was trying to somehow replicate that design, that idea, that notion of creating a story as a picture puzzle of blocks. And that story is the last story in the book. It's called Piecing Together Puzzles in Cambodia. And somehow I finally managed to do it. And it ended up being a 7,000-word story for the BBC.
Wow.
And I'm incredibly proud of that story. I put a lot of time and sweat and tears into that story. But it just hit me right now, talking to you, that that moment on stage at T-Bex, I was literally wrestling with how am I going to do this story. And here it is. It came out in the book, and that's kind of a wonderful full circle moment to be able to say that.
I hope they paid you by the word.
Let's say that my spiritual bank account is just overflowing with something.
Don, can I just say that I'll try that again. Don, can I just say that I love that you're a part of T-Bex, and that, let me backtrack. Mary Jo put out on Facebook today that there was 1 or 2 spots left, I think, for your writing workshop. And I believe that's coming up in Fort Lauderdale, right? They weren't talking about Thailand?
I think they were talking about Thailand. I know there's 1 spot left in Thailand. I'm not sure about Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, so it must be 1 spot left in Thailand. But I absolutely love that you've become a part of T-Bex and are teaching travel writing there, because you meet so many bloggers that crave learning about the art of travel writing as an essay, when they could school us on so much about the back end of the business side of it. And they know all the stuff about analytics and how to incorporate all the different types of social media and different ways of boosting a blog and boosting an audience and making a platform bigger. but
Mhm.
just find that to be such a beautiful balance.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love being a part of TBEX. I think it's part of my sense of myself as in the book. I say sometimes I think of myself as a travel evangelist. That I'm
Yes.
just I'm trying to spread the gospel of travel as a force that changes the world, a force for good, a force for peace and understanding in the world. And bloggers clearly have a huge, huge role to play in that. And so it's immensely gratifying for me to be able to interact with bloggers and to teach them what I've learned through the years about hopefully effective travel writing, and then to learn from them too. I learn a ton from them. But I really, really like that I'm a part of that energy and that momentum and that movement. And teaching's always been a really important thing for me. I don't teach very often during the year, but I teach one extended workshop, and then I teach workshops all around the world in different places, and I love doing that. And it's super important to me, that idea of giving what you've got, whatever life has taught you, imparting that to other people. That's just a fundamental part of what I do. And I love it. I love being a part of TBEX in that sense. It's really great. And the fact that I have my book coming out this year kind of propels me even more to help spread the word about what I think great travel writing is all about. So I'm thrilled to be a part of Bangkok and Fort Lauderdale.
And just in case somebody has just discovered the show and this is the first one they're listening to, we should say TBEX, the Travel Blog Exchange Conference, so the world's largest travel blogging conference. And as Don says, there are 2 different sessions that are coming up this year, with a third coming up next year, the European one in Stockholm next summer, and then in October this year, both Bangkok and Fort Lauderdale.
Thank you, Chris.
Just there might be someone who doesn't know what we're talking about.
Oh, there are.
Every time
there
I say
are.
tea bags, my Siri thinks I'm talking about tea bags, and I just don't want somebody to think that that's what we were talking about. So, and I think all of us are going. So, all of us are going to at least one of those. Is that right, Jen? Are you going to either of those?
I'll be speaking at the Fort Lauderdale one,
Okay.
but I won't be going to the Thailand one.
Got it.
And Gary's everywhere. Gary's probably going to both.
I'll be at both.
Is
I am
Gary
not
still here?
scheduled currently to go to either one, so
Okay.
we'll see. Ready to move on to our picks of the week?
Sure.
That's enthusiasm.
Well, let's wait a second before we do that. Don, is there anything else you want to tell us about the book or anything else you're working on that you would like to share with our listeners? Anything else? Where you can tell them where they can, is Book Passage selling the book online at all?
Book Passage is selling the book online. I mean, the book's available online at all book-selling sites. It's also available in the real world at brick-and-mortar bookstores. So yeah, I'd love for you to buy the book and send me any comments you want to send me about them through my website. That would be wonderful. The only other thing I think I'd say is just that what I learned putting the book together, one of the main lessons that emerged for me was how lucky I've been in my life to have the help of so many amazing people. That really just so clearly emerged from putting the book together, and so I just feel enormously grateful to all the people I've run into, including the 3 of you, in my journey around the planet. Just for all the help you've all given me through the years, and the support and engagement, and it's amazing. And the book feels like a culmination and a completion for me, in a way of saying thank you, and also the beginning of something new, which I don't know yet what that's going to be, but it feels very rounding. It's almost like a sacred circle feeling to the book that I'm super thrilled about, and I'm exhilarated to have it in the world, and just to share my view of life and travel and the world with everybody. And so thank you to you 3, and thanks to everybody out there who's going to look at the book and hopefully enjoy it.
If you got more questions for Don, do it now, because this is like free consulting. This is why you're on the show, Don. Just milking you for free information that we would otherwise have to pay for. Okay, now let's go on to the picks of the week. And I'll actually start it off this week, because I have 2. The first of which is just kind of a straight travel tip. one of the top credit cards for travel is the SPG Amex card. A lot of people might have that. Well, there were things about it that were not great, and they've fixed the biggest one this month, and that is they no longer charge foreign exchange fees. That's a big one. So that is now one of the things. On the Everything Everywhere Facebook group, we had a guy that, it's just a community for people to talk about travel. He rented a car in Namibia, and they take a deposit from your credit card that they later refund when you bring the car back. The problem was, it was in Namibian dollars when they took the money off his card, and then when they put it back, he got hit both times with foreign exchange fees. And he ended up paying like $500 in foreign exchange fees for them taking money out and putting it back on his credit card.
Wow.
So use a foreign exchange. And the other cool thing is they just announced that you now get free Boingo Wi-Fi if you have the SPG Amex card. I've been using Boingo for since I've been traveling. I think 2007 I got my account. I've been using it ever since. They now have over 1 million hotspots worldwide that you can log on. Sometimes there are other companies that run it, but you can log on with your Boingo account. Most airports in the U.S. use Boingo. So now you don't even need to get a Boingo if you just get this credit card. And the value of that, I'd have to go check the Boingo site, but it's like well over $100 a year. So,
sure. Yeah.
Gary, that is amazing. I have the SPG Amex. What do I need to do in order to get that free Boingo Wi-Fi? Do I have to enroll, or when I get to a Boingo hotspot, I use my SPG Amex card?
Go to the Amex website. You should see a thing for it when you log in, and then just click and follow the instructions. That's all you got to do. Very simple. So that's like my travel tip. My other one is, so I am now officially, I'm on a project to visit all 104 national parks in the United States and Canada. And as of last week, I'm officially 50% of the way through this project when I visited Cochibouguac National Park in New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island National Park, Fundy National Park, and Torngat Mountains National Park in northern Labrador, which is the one I want to talk about. Parks in the U.S. and Canada tend to fall into two categories. They're either really easy to get to, meaning you get in a car and you go, which is pretty much every park most people have been to, and that's like 90% of the parks. Or they're really, really hard to get to, and these are the ones like above the Arctic Circle, which 8 people visit a year. And Torngat Mountains, I had been talking to Parks Canada about this, and the park is now 10 years old, and they were doing a media trip, and it gets about 400 visitors a year. It is jointly managed and owned. I think the land is actually still owned by the Inuit who live in northern Labrador. And it is a remarkable place, absolutely remarkable. There's more bears than trees, and by that there are no trees. We caught Arctic char. You know, basically we went out for, we took a trip on some Zodiacs, and lunch was, here are the fishing poles, catch your fish. And people were bringing in these large salmon-sized fish within 2 minutes. I mean, it was just amazing. We had Inuit throat singers there, an Inuit drum dancer who was there, learned a lot about Inuit culture, and it was the most different park experience that I've ever had. We were in a base camp and also visited some Inuit archaeological sites that are in the park and around the park. Fantastic experience, and something that very, very few people get to do. I think there were 800 people that were in the park total last year, and the majority of those were on expedition ships sailing up to Greenland. So there were very few people that actually spent time in the park, and it's an amazing experience, and just the first of a bunch of parks I'm going to be visiting over the next several years in Nunavut and above the Arctic Circle. So the Torngat Mountains, fantastic place to visit.
Excellent. I learned something this week, Gary, about national parks. Here's a trivia question for you. You know that the first national park in the United States was
Yellowstone.
We just talked about it, Yellowstone. Right. Do you know what the second one was? It is no longer a national park, but a state park. We will be talking about it in 3 weeks on the Amateur Traveler. It was Mackinac Island.
I have been there. I went there when I was a kid. It was in the late 70s. And the thing I remember is that it's a big manufacturing place of fudge, and one of the fudge shops had a little sign out front saying, President Gerald Ford ate fudge in this shop during the bicentennial year. And I don't know why, but that stuck with me.
It actually is my first travel experience memory ever. Was going to Mackinac Island. I was 2. All I remember is getting lost from my parents on the ferry and seeing knees. But it is my first travel memory anywhere.
Yeah, I haven't been back there since I was a kid. But there are no cars on the island.
Right.
And I remember there was a battle for the War of 1812 that was there.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
What state, Chris?
It's just at the bridge between Michigan and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
So it's the Straits of Mackinac, and the Mackinac Bridge is what connects the Upper and Lower Peninsulas of Michigan.
That is correct.
So is that your pick, or?
That is not my pick.
Okay.
My pick is I've been playing with Instagram recently, and so I bought just a fun little toy, and I think some of you probably have seen these before, but I have a fisheye lens for my iPhone. It's an Aerb, A-E-R-B. It's a clip-on lens. Basically, it's a 3-in-1. It's a fisheye lens, a macro lens, and I think a wide angle. And it just clips onto your iPhone, and it's very simple to take on and off and to do just a little more with iPhone photography.
And is that similar to the Olo clip? $9?
It's $9.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, I paid considerably more than that for my Olo clip.
Yes, that's one of the reasons I got these. Is they've actually come down to the point at which that even if you don't use it, you won't feel guilty about it. I mean, that's.
I want to
really...
say I paid close to $100 or around $100. Wow, good job, Chris. Good find.
Jen, do you have a pick for us this week?
I do. You know how I always like to tie it into our subject matter, and in honor of Keith Bellows, I'm picking 100 places that can change your child's life, from your backyard to the ends of the earth. And this is a book that he did, and so I found it when I was learning about him today, and so I'm going to go out and buy that this week.
Do you know any of the 100 places?
I'm going to go out and buy it this week, Chris.
Okay. None of them happen to be a safe in a Howard Johnson's in.
Yes.
That would change your child. I guess it never says for better or worse. Don, do you have a pick for us this week?
I wasn't prepared, but two picks that come to mind. Well, one is just a travel tip. Well, they're both travel tips, actually. One travel tip would be always bring a flashlight. I discovered that on a trip recently that I didn't have one. And then the second travel trip would be always embrace your fear.
Mm.
And you discovered that because you didn't bring the flashlight.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but what if your fear is of the dark? Then these two things just don't go together.
Okay, that brings up a great topic. So, Don, what have you been afraid of that you were able to conquer through travel?
Well, I mean, so just going back to that Cambodia story that I wrote, one of the things that happened on that story was I set up a homestay in this incredibly remote Cambodian village where there were no places to stay except homestays, and it was the rainy season, so the roads were impassable. I arrived. I took a taxi there. The taxi dropped me there. I met the sort of person overseeing the homestay who took me to the home. My parents didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Khmer. And it was a stilt house, and I had a little tiny room on the second floor of the stilt house. The temperature was probably 110 degrees. The humidity was about 1,000%. The mud was like crawling up to my ankles. And suddenly there I was in this house in a compound of stilt houses, cocks crowing, babies wailing, people yelling, rain cascading down and stopping and cascading down. And I just got to my room and I thought, what in the world am I doing here? I've signed up for 3 nights. I don't know. There's no internet. I don't know where the bathroom is. I don't know if there is a bathroom. I don't really have any idea how I'm going to get in to see anything. I have no means of transportation. I have no means of communication. This is great. And so it wasn't exactly fear, but it was definitely a meltdown moment. I had a meltdown moment.
As an adult.
I was waiting for you to say, but thank God I have my flashlight.
Exactly. Well, late at night, yeah, that flashlight would have been handy. So, but one day, day one, day two, by the end of day two, as I walked through the muck, people were smiling at me. People were, saying, "Hello, hello." I got to see some incredible, extraordinary temples that I more amazing than anything I'd seen in my life, temple-wise. I had all these amazing experiences. By day three, I was writing in my journal, "Oh my God, I can't believe day three is already here. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here forever," kind of thing. And so that was such a perfect example of how, at the beginning, our fears or our discomforts just overwhelm us, and we're like, "Oh, this is the worst thing I've ever done. Why am I here? This is so stupid." And then 3 days later, I'm like, "I'm so glad I came here. This has been amazing. I really don't want to leave." So that was a pretty perfect example of that.
I believe they call that the Stockholm Syndrome, but I could be mistaken about that.
No, it was really quite wonderful. It was a very wonderful village, and I would love to go back.
All right, then, let's start to wrap things up. Chris, what is new on the Amateur Traveler this week?
We did a domestic destination. We did the American Riviera, Santa Barbara, last week on the Amateur Traveler.
And it wasn't your last time, but you had a recent episode that is probably going to win a Lowell Thomas Award this year, I've heard.
What?
It was on also a domestic one.
I think Gary might be talking about when he came on the show and we talked about all of the U.S. UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah, that was me.
Actually, it was a fun episode.
I know.
Gary and I are both huge national park geeks, and so many of the parks in the U.S. are what become the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and I really still think I'm completely with the idea that national parks are one of America's best ideas. So.
Which reminds me, even though I live in Wisconsin, I grew up here, I've never been to Taliesin.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and that'll probably become one next year, and I need to get around to doing that. I've been to some of the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings in Madison, but not some of the other ones in Wisconsin.
Have you been to his only skyscraper, which is, I am told by our friend Robert Reed, in Oklahoma?
I have not. But I think the Bay Area also has one as well that's on the list for next year. Is it a church of some sort in San Francisco?
I do not know.
I forget. But anyways, yeah. Jen, where can people find you?
Yes, well, I want to invite our listeners to join me on Tuesday morning, 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. I'm going to be doing a Kids and Trips Twitter party focused on road trips, especially a little pre-travel safety tip for day road trip travels. And our sponsor is Liberty Mutual, and we'll be giving away $400 worth of Visa cards.
I can summarize that whole Twitter chat in one word: iPad. Give your kids an iPad. They'll just zone out for a couple hours. They're watching Barney or whatever they're watching, playing games. You don't have to deal with them until you get to your destination.
I think you are missing the complete joys of camp songs and playing the alphabet game in the car.
Hashtag Kids and Trips, 9:38 to 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning.
Hashtag the one guy here doesn't have a kid.
Don, as we do your outro, I don't think we mentioned the title of your book, so let's say that 3 times and remind our listeners where we can find you and your new book, The Way of Wanderlust.
Right. So the book's title is The Way of Wanderlust, the best travel writing of Don George. It's available bookstores online and offline, and you can find more information about it and about me on my website, which is don-george.com.
So it's not subtitled The Best Travel Writing of John George so far?
Well, that's kind of understood. Volume 2 is in the works already, even now.
Even better travel writing of Don George.
Even better travel writing. Better, best travel writing.
The bestest.
Exactly.
And as usual, you can find me at everything-everywhere.com and on iTunes, where the Global Travel Conspiracy has been on the front page of the iTunes podcast section this last week. Lots of neat stuff happening there, so please go download it, subscribe, and leave a review, because that's always really nice. And until next time, get outside and check out Don George's new book, The Way of Wanderlust.